Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learnings. In a first and exclusive, not only have we got Liani Mannifield from Keller Williams in Weybridge, but we've also got Chocolate, her dog, as well.
And my business partner.
It's not many podcasts you get dogs on there. I know mine are really, really noisy, and what with my dogs and my bird as well, it can be a bit of a zoo. So maybe they're gonna talk to each other today, and there's going to be a doggy podcast as well. But thank you very much for joining me. I know that you're at your centre office in Maidenhead today.
Yes. So thanks for having me. It's always nice to be able to contribute.
No, it's a pleasure. So we have the pleasure of meeting, I think, last week when I jumped on a course unexpectedly that our mutual friend Peter Ambrose was putting on the conveyancing, which I found incredibly helpful, despite being in the industry for 30 years. So maybe we'll come and talk about that a bit. Talk about you. So estate agency, how did you become involved in it, and why? Why do you want to become an estate agent?
And why? Do you know what? Actually, it's a question people often ask me. So I moved here from South Africa about 17 years ago now, a little over 17 years. I sort of fell into the world of estate agency, I guess, because when I arrived, it was a case of, what am I going to do now? I don't have a university degree. What kind of job am I going to get that's going to pay me decently well and give me a car? And so hence I sort of fell into estate agency and fell in love with property as a whole. So, I think I've done lots of different things in my career. I started initially back in the day with Foxtons. I moved from there to some of the other bigger brands, Dexter's, Countrywide, and so on. And I did everything from lettings, which is where I started, to acquisitions, to renewals, you name it. So I've had a really, really wide experience, I guess, because I'm the sort of person I always need to be learning. I always need to be looking at what the next challenge is and, how I'm progressing myself. And which also is part of the reason, obviously, I joined Peter's learning session, because, no matter how long you've worked in this industry, you still always find that there's something that you don't know, or that you pick up, that you think you knew. And it's always valuable. I think one of the things that's very important to me is that you keep learning as long as you go along. And so then I worked for the University of Surrey, started with them in 2016 for a really, really interesting sort of career change. They wanted me to come in and set up effectively for them a lettings business, but not a separate company, sort of a department within the university. So no one had done that before, no other university. We had tremendous amount of success. We won a number of different awards, but where the change came for me really with the state agency was the function that we served there was both a rent-to-rent sort of head lease portfolio. But the interesting part was that we also looked after student welfare and support, and that was for all of our students that lived off campus. So no matter where in the UK, one of the things that we were very keen on always as the university, because Guildford is a university town, one of the things that we always worked hard on was the community engagement aspect. So doing things within the community with, the local politicians, businesses, everything under the sun. And so for me, I found it really rewarding to see what a community can do for you and how rewarding it is to make students feel part of that community that they live in, as opposed to feeling like they're students and they're taking up all the housing, which is a lot of time what they get from the community. And some of the fantastic things projects we worked on was Guildford in Bloom. So we had a student garden every year, and they won, I think the first year was a silver and the second year a gold award. We sat on the HMO board for Guildford Borough Council. So we had a real input and an influence. And I think, for me, that was a changing point, because normally when you come from a high street agency, you're looking always at what your bottom line is. You're working for your client, you're doing what's best, but ultimately you're making a commercial decision 100%. So for me, this was a complete change. But the other aspect which changed it for me tremendously, but on a personal basis, is on the welfare and support aspect of things. Again, you move tenants in, but you support your landlord mostly because they are your client. And you can try and be fair, but ultimately you support your client. So we were sort of creating this service which was desperately needed for students, especially in Guildford at the time, because there was a huge housing crisis. University just won University of the Year. They were ranked 4th in I think, the Guardian. So they had become very popular. And all of a sudden we had students that were sort of homeless, sleeping on a park bench, or turning up thinking they'll get accommodation really quickly and they can't. Or in fact, students living in properties where, neighbors are being abusive to them, or within their house they might fall out, or a number of different things that happen. Excuse me. And so part of what my team were tasked to do was to tackle and take on these cases. So whether that was a private landlord or whether that was an agency, we were standing up for students' rights, and in actual fact, tenant rights as opposed to student rights. It just happened that they were students. But having worked in lettings for such a long period of time, I've always seen the unfair balance of the scale between, do you choose the tenant, do you choose the landlord? Sometimes they're both wrong, sometimes nobody's wrong to a degree. And so for me, the reward actually came in a much bigger picture than what I'd seen through my decade plus in agency, where you're working at your commission. That's what drove you. The reward from actually helping people and being involved in community initiatives was far greater than the commission I took home at the end of the day, because at the university I was on a fixed salary. So for me, it was an opportunity again to do something slightly different, but also it changed me tremendously. So at the back end of 2020, in the midst of COVID, I had decided to resign my post at the university, and I wasn't quite sure exactly where I was going to go and what I was going to do next. But the one thing I was very certain about was, one, I wanted to give back to my community where I live in Weybridge, which was very important to me, because that's where my daughter and I live. That's where she goes to school. And I think there's lots of those things in the community that happen that you're not a part of, lots of, projects, etc. So I wanted to make sure that whatever I did next actually enabled me to have the work-life balance that we talk about. So not the work-life balance, I can go home at 5 o'clock, the work-life balance where actually you have got time to spend with your family or do the things that you want to do. So I joined Keller Williams. I'd known about Keller Williams for some time. It's for a lot of people, they're not entirely sure how Keller Williams works, what the setup is, but it's the way that a estate agency is done all across the world, except for in the UK. So, they're a brokerage. I run my own business, but it gives me complete control both over my diary, over my freedom, all of those things, but also, therefore, it gave me the freedom to participate in those community initiatives and activities. And I knew that by my community seeing that I'm actively involved in making it better, that people would naturally, see me and recognize me and become aware of my brand. So it was a sort of a twofold thing for me. So, we've done lots of different initiatives and projects, and I think there's probably 2 or 3 that really sort of stand out for me, if you sort of wanted me to talk about that in any more detail, Stephen.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic, please.
Yeah, so I think the first initiative that I had is we had quite substantial amount of antisocial behavior during the COVID lockdown. So we had youths from other areas flock to our cricket green, if you want to call it that. So that's where I live very close to our cricket green, sort of quite literally opposite. And we had at one weekend nearly 200 youths that the police had sort of moved on. But this was going on for, probably 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks. And the council said no, and the police said no. Nobody wanted to help us. And so my daughter and I flyered the neighborhood around the green because we knew it was upsetting everyone. I mean, we'd go litter picking in the mornings and it'd be 30 bags of litter. So as a community, actually, for the first time, we came together out the green because we could. The space was big enough and open enough. And after we still got a sort of negative pushback, I then made it my personal duty to get to know the people that could make those changes. And the reason it's important and why I sort of lead with the story is the people that I met through that initiative or project essentially became the people that helped me as I moved on with other community projects. So you had your local elected councillors, you had the police, a local police inspector, you know, he will now sometimes text me and say, "Oh, Liani, we've got this lady, she's single, she's moved to the area. Do you know of any groups that you could go to?" Or, you know, those kind of things. So the nice thing for me was, and it's not every community that flourishes in that way, but everybody really wanted to come together and kind of, you know, help on different things. And so eventually, after many fights in different audiences, we had a dispersal order put in place on 3 separate occasions, which meant the police could move them on. But through that initiative, people saw that I was a community activist, and so therefore approached me with lots of different projects. So one of the probably most heartwarming things I had done was one of the local residents I've known, you know, our kids have gone to school together, still go to school together, have known them for 7 odd years. I'd found out that they were in rent arrears and they owed over £6,000 in rent, and they had been served an eviction notice. And the day I went round to their house, I could really see that they were struggling. There was no food in the kitchen. And you feel for that child and for those parents, you know. And so I set up a community fundraiser, which was harder to do than you might think because you're not collecting money for a charity. And so people always work on the basis that you must collect for a charity so that people are means tested. And one of the very sad things for me with this was nobody knew about them, not the food banks, not the council, nobody, because they were too embarrassed to ask for help, hence why their cupboards were bare. And so a lot of our local advertising groups on social media wouldn't allow me to post the fundraiser because it wasn't raising money for a charity. And a charity couldn't allocate the money to them. But for me, it was quite personal. So I got, you know, our schools involved, and people in the community donated nearly £5,000 of the 6,000 and a bit that they needed, or that the 6,000 we tried to raise, and donated food, clothing, school uniform, electronics. I mean, it was incredibly heartwarming, in all honesty. You know, they probably had enough supply for 6 or 7 months. And there's very few times when I've had the look on someone's face of complete relief and gratitude because there's a little bit of hope. And I've always been a firm believer. I think that's what I apply to business too. If someone tells me that I can't do something because the book says I can't, I will always try and push the boundaries so that actually we can do it. Just because there's a red tape doesn't mean we can't do it. We can. We just have to think about it creatively or rely on the resources that we have. And another really good example. So there was the Weybridge chainsaw massacre, we called them. This was someone who'd gone round a couple of Weybridge, Hersham, sort of Elmbridge borough, chopping down trees with an electric chainsaw that nobody could catch this guy. I think the final count of trees was somewhere between 30 and 40 trees. But the really sad thing was some of those were commemorative trees. You know, some of those really old trees. You can't just replace a tree. And if you've ever tried to replace a tree via your council, go find out. It is a heck of a process. So what we ended up doing is I thought, okay, well, the community started a sort of a neighborhood patrol. The police said absolutely not. But funny enough, they were the people who eventually caught the perpetrator. He was never prosecuted due to lack of evidence, but luckily it stopped after that. And so anyways, I started the fundraiser and I said, okay, we're going to fundraise some money and at least we're going to replace some of the trees, or we're going to have a commemorative bench or something that, you know, will make people see that we're standing together as a community. We raised about £1,700 because it was a criminal investigation. We couldn't actually have any attachment. We couldn't correlate any of the events that we wanted to do with the fact that it had related to the chainsaw because it was an ongoing investigation. So what we ended up doing, and the people who helped me on this project were, you know, a lot of the people that I worked with initially on the very first project, you know, and the antisocial behavior. And what we ended up doing is we managed to afford 5 trees, £1,700, but we bought mature trees. We planted them down by the river, by Weybridge Canoe Club, and each of the 5 trees were commemorative trees to people that we lost during COVID, and that we were celebrating life and new life and coming together as a community. And I tell you, the day the turnout was incredible. You know, my daughter planted a tree. We had the Weybridge Men's Choir there. They lost 7 of their members during COVID. And that was due to loneliness. The mayor came out, the leader of Surrey County Council came out, residents. It was just absolutely fantastic. And those trees are there forever now. Somewhere for people to go to say, well, we're not, as a community, we stand up against people who behave like this and we won't back down, but actually doing something nice and just giving people a little bit of closure, I guess.
You know what? Every single story there is absolutely amazing, and you should be incredibly proud of what you've done to support your community. Right. I know from the 2 campaigns that I've got, so the Computer for Schools campaign, which is nationwide, and that's raised £129,000, and I think about 1,265 laptops and tablets have gone to schools throughout the country. And then also the Markers for Mindfulness campaign, where schools don't have a budget for stationery, and there's no, they ration paper, and there are kids going into schools not being fed. And I think, there's a massive lesson here that, and also with your friend that, nobody knew what was going on. There's so many people that are suffering in silence at the moment.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of people that are maybe embarrassed, don't want to speak about it, or afraid. And I think if people can go out there and help and make the difference to their community, which you've done, which is absolutely fantastic, it will make our communities a much, 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 much better place. Here's a question for you.
Yeah, go on.
I think it's absolutely fantastic what you've done, and you're obviously an action taker, an implementer. You don't mess about. So some people in here trouble to get started. What advice would you have about getting involved? And you obviously don't like taking no for an answer, so perseverance is a huge quality that you've got. What advice would you have for people that are maybe struggling to get out of their comfort zone, struggling to get started?
Well, I think, and I was probably in a similar position. And I think with the luxury of my job at the university, I had the backing of a brand that I knew people wanted to engage with. So when I went out on my own, believe me, it was scary for me too. You can to some degree fake the confidence. But, the advice that I would give to someone is, not everybody has my type of personality, and probably thank goodness for that in many respects. But one of the things that I, learned through my process as well is not everybody has to have the same personality, because people bring different values. And so one of the things that I did, for example, to sort of put myself out there a little bit, as opposed to someone who's going and, cheering from the front, I joined some of our local groups. So we've got a litter picking group where you can even adopt a street if you want to, which means you kind of get to know your neighbors and just other people. And one of the reasons also I did that is because, I'm a single mom. I've got some friends, but most of my friends are married. Not all of them live in Weybridge even. And I think that was also for me a way of getting to know people locally without needing to go to a speed dating event. And not that I was there to date. I just wanted to know some people. So you're like, and so I did that. And I also joined as a volunteer our Weybridge in Bloom, so our sort of gardening group, if you like. And they do all sorts of things. And, it's mainly, a couple of, older ladies who potter around and, help weed on a Tuesday morning. And people do it in their own time. But it gave me the confidence, first of all, just to speak to people on a neutral space, without being the one that needs to instigate what happens, but also for me to gain some knowledge and some insight into the community that I live. I think the more I've been involved in these kind of things, Stephen, the more I realize, we've got a Ukrainian hub in Weybridge, which, is led by, again, one of my friends and our local councillor, where she brings people together to help teach skills. I had some of them delivering leaflets for me as a sort of a summer job, some of the teenagers and so on. There's so many little things. And I think people are often very apprehensive because you don't know if it's out of your comfort zone. But, everybody might not want to garden or litter pick. But there's lots of sort of little things. For me, if I walk into, let's say, a Friday night dance class, I'm going to be mortified. I will feel very uncomfortable. I won't sit at the bar and talk to a random stranger, but putting myself in a position, which is why I chose gardening and litter picking, because it generally tends to be nice people, or people who want to give back to their community and the environment. I thought, let me ease myself into this. And I think the most refreshing thing for me was people are really receptive and really welcoming. I think it's very few occasions where you'll get people will be negative if you're volunteering your time, even volunteering at your local sports club to keep football score or cricket score, whatever it might be, just getting yourself out there slowly, bit by bit, and then actually seeing what there are things that I enjoy. It's daunting for everyone, but don't bite off more than you can chew to begin with. is the magic trick, I guess.
Brilliant, thank you. So coming back to the start, you said you were always learning. So, Foxtons is a great company, well renowned in London. I won't share any of my Foxtons stories from what happened years and years ago. But Peter Rawlings was a great guest on here. And he knows what I'm talking about. So what did you learn working at Foxtons? And you mentioned Dexter's and the corporate companies that you've been able to take on to where you are today.
Stephen, most of what I know, in all honesty, I worked for Foxtons for just under 2 years, and I can hand on heart tell you to this very day that if it wasn't for me starting my career at Foxtons, I wouldn't have progressed through my career as quickly as I did. I'm obviously very motivated and ambitious and driven, and all of those things are great. But unless you actually have someone who's reinforcing that drive behind you. And, anyone that's worked for Foxtons will know Naomi Murdoch, who was my manager at the time. And, her and I used to butt heads because she pushed me to a point where, but if she didn't, and she was just an average manager at a company with average training that wasn't pushing you to do your best and giving you the best possible chance, I never would have gone on to succeed as well as I did. And when I moved from there to Dexter's, I set up their corporate services department, and then I went off and had a child. So, I took what I knew in terms of the skills I had in the black book of contacts, which, in my career now is my value, is I've got an incredible network, which is why I can work across such a broad spectrum. I've got the agency, but I also sell developments, investment, land sites, because I've got enough varied contacts to be able to do that. So, through all the companies that I've worked for, there's always a training element to things. Where the change really has come for me is I've got the technical knowledge and the technical skill. So I understand the process, I understand the compliance. That's the stuff in the background. But what really made me stand out, so when I joined Keller Williams for the first year, you're sort of getting your feet under the table, and it's running your own business, and it's overwhelming. It's doing something that petrifies you. And the first year was a complete roller coaster. And in the second year, I capped, which means excuse me, I pay some of my commission, obviously, to Keller Williams as my brokerage, as my firm I'm attached to, until a certain point, after which I take 98% of my commission. So, when you go through that and you finally invoice, and they're only taking 2% of your commission fee, it's the best feeling. But where the change really came for me was working with a business coach, and not a business coach, a property business coach. So Craig Delahoy is just the most fantastic coach I think I've ever come across. And what he really works on with us, and what Keller Williams does, because believe it or not, Keller Williams is a training company, actually. They're a technology business, but a lot of it is about training so that people who aren't agents can become agents. But where Craig is different is Craig will script practice with you. Ever since I started working with Craig, I never walk away from a listing with less than a 2% sales fee. I'm so confident going in because I know actually what I'm talking about, and I don't have a brand to hide behind. But the great thing is, within our Keller Williams organization, they also employ him to help us, which is obviously how you grow. And I think if it wasn't for him, that helped me so tremendously. And just, now I work with him now and then, but actually every day when I'm on a listing appointment, or I'm reviewing, or I'm negotiating, or I'm just getting a bit stuck with things, or how do I negotiate this? By far, taking away the technical ability, that's probably why I capped so quickly in my second year, because all of a sudden I was going and I doubled my business. The first year I sold everything at 1% because I was so desperate just for a house to sell. And I simply doubled my business by charging a bigger fee. So when you talk about work-life balance, actually, I can now do half the amount of work for the same money, technically, with family and go on 3 holidays if I want to.
There you go. That's a massive, massive learning curve. I really want to work with you, Liana, but I'm not willing to pay 2%. I tell you what, I'll sign my terms of business now at 1%. Here's my pen. I'll sign it now.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me to sell the pen back to you. Do you know, I'll give you a good line that Craig always tells you. You win the agent competition before you win the fee competition. And so really what our value proposition is, as a, we call ourselves bespoke agent, fiduciary agents. I mean, you hear all these lovely words. Essentially, I do what most agents do, but I do it better because I have less, my business model doesn't focus on volume. So I don't have to sell 100 houses a year. I focus on selling 2 houses a month. That's where I need to sell between 24 and 30 houses a year, give or take. That's what I'm happy with. I mean, you can grow your team, bring other agents in. But, the fundamental difference, Stephen, is we always joke because you walk in the door and they go, what's my house worth and what's your fee? And that's where the conversation ends. And a poor agent will always, overprice on the price and undercut on their fee just to win the business. I'd rather walk away from it. I am going to get the best price. I'm going to tell you how I'm going to do it and why I'm different. And then if you feel that I'm the best agent for you, then you're going to pay my fee. Because you've got to remember something, and I always laugh, we always get compared to purple bricks, and I guess it's a similar model in many ways, apart from the fact that we don't obviously charge, a fee up front. If you want me to do a 2% job for you, you pay me 2%. If you're talking about the most valuable asset that you own, let's say average house, £500,000, let's say. So you want to sit and fight with me over £5,000, when we're talking the most valuable asset you own, you've got to trust me to do the best thing, get you the best price, but you want to pay me as little as possible. And I think what people tend to forget is a lot of times estate agents, most of the time, we work for free. You might see through a sale that collapses last minute. There's no, other than Scotland, there's no fallback for us. So, I will spend a couple of £100 on doing the marketing, spending all my time, and someone changes their mind. And I've done all that work for nothing. So, people often say to me, why do they get paid so much? 90% of my business, probably 95% of my business comes from referrals or recommendations from people. People don't quibble about the 2% because I deliver what I say I'm going to do, and even if I have to walk away from a listing, and, I'll give you an example. Just last week, myself and one of the other agents that I'm working with, Keller Williams agents, and this is the beauty of it all. The two of us can sort of come in as 2 agents, but you get us for one price almost because we'll split our fee. And so Carlo and I were talking to this client since the back end of last year. He didn't want, he wanted to put it on with the agent that was in fact, actually, the agent said to him, well, you can pay 0.75%. And if I don't sell it for over this price, then you can have the sales fee for free. I said, this makes no sense to me. So anyway, so we're looking at this house, and now finally 4 months later, he's come back to us and he said, oh, you guys still interested? And I had a very frank conversation with him. I said, let's just go through the marketing for one. I said, your agent is based in Harrow, nowhere near an hour and a half from where the place is. So he doesn't have a local database. So there's no benefit in me working alongside him. I'll collaborate with anyone if they add value. I said, let's go through the photos. I mean, the photos were horrific. Unmade beds, bath mats everywhere. The photography for me, I am there with my photographer, usually for 2 or 3 hours, meticulously making sure it's 100% perfect. So, I think one of the biggest complaints that we hear is communication. And what you've got to remember, the way that our model is set up, I'm the point of contact. I've got a back office function that helps with little things, but I'm the responsible party. Now, I don't work with 100 houses at a time. I don't get paid my commission and I have to compete against 10 other negotiators in my office. So I can do my job properly, which means you show me everything. You show me why you love living here. I show your house. I negotiated. And I also personally oversee the sales progression, which, I had one last year. We exchanged in a week and we completed 2 weeks later, and everybody was, absolutely gobsmacked. I said, you can, but I am there. I'm driving physically contracts in one day from Rains Park to Watford to Guildford, because I need to get these in so we can get exchanged and get it over the line. You won't get that from a high street agent, never. They don't have the time to do it. So the service that I provide to my clients is good enough that they don't mind paying that extra money, providing we get the price we need.
Brilliant.
So I think you have to keep your pen and your 1%, Stephen.
You're keeping my pen, hey? I just want my pen back now. Okay. So look, I think there's loads of lessons in there. I think what you're talking about, how agents market properties, you know, so presentation, price, and promotion is incredibly important. One of my favorite things, and I think a lot of agents miss a trick, is negotiating skills. So as a seller, I want a skilled negotiator who's going to get me top pounds for my, you know, for my potentially biggest tax-free asset. So I want everybody to sweat blood to do that. And I think there's too many agents that they just see it as a one-off transaction rather than seeing it as, hold on here, I'm building a relationship, a client for life. And I think as an industry, we need to go away from it. And for me, it's right, how can we get every last single penny? So, and being a skilled negotiator. And I think agency is relatively simple if people master 4 disciplines, which is creating the opportunities in the first place so that you can list, mastering listing, mastering selling or letting. But also I think the fourth one, which is I think very underutilized by a lot of agents, is negotiating skills. And I think if you can master
Stephen, I think
things, you're there.
You know, when I think back on my agency career and so on too, I mean, those bits of training lessons you do in the classroom is one thing, but it takes you, you know, years and years, and you've got to literally be growing the whole time and learning, you know, and that's one of the things that I always took on board. Is to constantly be growing. You know, even now I still go on courses, I still attend webinars, I still do all of those things. You know, today we're here in Maidenhead and we've got probably 20 of our agents here because we're all here to learn. We've just done a huge session on social media, and you walk around and think, my goodness, you know, there's one of my weak spots. But, you know, typically how it works in the agency, person who's selling and negotiating your sale is going to be the negotiator, sometimes the manager. And listen, I'm not saying all agents are poor. I've worked and still work with some fantastic high street agents, but estate agency has become lazy. You know, agents want to, especially when stock is low, you know, so many times I go in and I walk away from listings because I just won't list at that price. And I'm not, you know, if you want me to work hard, you pay my fee. And it's funny because you talk about your 1%. Often I'll say to a client, I said, okay, you're going to list with a high street agent because you want to pay them 1% for your £500,000 house. I said, so if I'm a negotiator who works predominantly on commission, am I going to sell the £500 house at 1% or at 2%? Whose house is getting the most attention when I have to compete against others? And they go, oh, yeah. I said, when I was a negotiator, that's exactly how I thought. I sold and rented the stuff that made me the most amount of commission. Almost each tenancy I had was a 3-year tenancy because that maximized my commission. You know, and we forget that to some degree, and I'll probably get a lot of backlash for this, but to some degree, estate agents are selfish. You know, we work for our client, yes, but we also work for what's going to make our office the biggest deal or the biggest commission. And that's the beauty that I love. So for me, it doesn't make a huge difference in my commission in terms of what I take home, because I don't take home a 10% cut of my commission, which is your typical, you know, high street rate. So, you know, for me, I think there's so many good estate agents, and it's so daunting to set up your own business, but I just wish more people would get on board with it. You know, one of the biggest benefits for me has been that if I look back over the last 6 months in terms of listings, so listings I've been given and even listings that I've sold, I've collaborated on almost each and every single one of those with another Keller Williams agent, where either we've worked together to find a buyer or a seller, off market, you name it. And I work with the high street agents too. I will sometimes co-list and invite one of the high street agents to co-list with me. You know, if that's what we agree is the best strategy. But I tell you, you know, I think the beauty with Keller Williams is we've got about 500 agents now. But, you know, even this morning we call it a speed networking. So you can present your deal. And out of that, we've already saw 5 of us have got buyers for things that others of us are trying to sell, because we're sitting in a room and having a conversation. We're not working against each other. You and for us, it's all about building repeat business. We're building a database. That's 100% what we're focused on. Those repeat clients. And now that I'm coming into my sort of third year, I guess, I'm seeing that repeat business. I'm seeing something I sold for a developer, and now we've done the next project, and we've just bought the next project. And you see that kind of, repeat business coming through now, which is lovely. One of my lettings clients, he added on a ton of stuff to my portfolio last year because I do a good job for them. So he grew my portfolio from about 20 to about 65 at the moment. So for me, that's a tremendous achievement on repeat business, and that's in my third year. So, it's it can only go up from here on.
Fantastic. I think you said something really important that I picked up on there, especially in this market where I think you've got to be a matchmaker rather than an order taker, is
Absolutely.
know your buyers. Really important. And what you said is, you sat in the room today, you've said, right, I've got particular properties, and you said, right, well, this buyer, and so many agents, when I do this courses, and I did a list of masterclass yesterday, and when it comes to preparation, I say, right, before you go into an appraisal, whatever you call it, consultation, I just want you to write down who your 5 hottest buyers are. And people really struggle. And for me, you really need to know who your hot buyers are, especially more so now, and I say this very respectfully. Agents were incredibly, last 2 years has been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you didn't have to pick up the phone. You didn't have to call people. You had people calling you. You're getting loads and loads of offers. Yep. You were going to best and final offers. It was absolutely fantastic.
It was madness. You had one open house and it was done.
Yeah. Whereas now it's different, and you've really got to be that matchmaker, and you've got to know the buyers. And I think that's a really important point. So one final question, because you've been an amazing guest and you shared loads, and I love what you're doing on the community. You said you're always learning. Obviously, we touched on the Peter Ambrose Insights course, which was great. So anybody out there, Peter Ambrose at the partnership is putting on all these 45 minutes, 1 hour courses. And we're asking for his donation for Computer for Schools campaign. And actually, if you donate and it's a certain amount, you get a tablet that goes back to you to give to school in your area as well. But is there any particular books, podcasts you highly recommend? I'm a big fan of The One Thing by Gary Keller. Great book. And he's, I think, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent as well, which is also a great book, and loads of lessons on there. Anything else that you recommend?
Well, to be fair, you're right. The One Thing is amazing. And also, anybody who joins will read through that book again and again and again. And if you follow that model and that formula, it just simply works. And I was recently given a book. So I belong to a, given is the wrong word, borrowed. So I belong to a property investment group, and we meet once a month, and we sort of share different things. But we have a library. And so you can bring certain books and magazines, and we exchange them property related. And I picked up a book that said The Accidental Landlord. And forgive me, I can't recall the author right now. And I thought, this is going to be just one of those typical, who do we know? Lettings changes all the time. But I tell you, one of the best books ever, because it's so simple. And I think all aimed, because those investors are private landlords. So for me, who knows the industry, it's different. But actually, often when people ask me to explain something to them that doesn't have a lettings background, they don't understand a word of what you're saying. But this book was fantastic. It didn't teach you how to grow your business. It just taught you how to be a really good landlord. So, especially if you're an agent that's perhaps fairly new to lettings, or just wanting to explain things to your clients in a simple way, this book for me was, and I'll get the title over to you, but it was just one of those, not an inspirational, but just so simple. And I thought, this is gold.
Brilliant. Well, look, I'm really grateful for yours and Chocolate's time. I mean, Chocolate has been so
out on the floor, I'm afraid.
been so well behaved. So thank you, Chocolate. Thank you, Liani, for being a great guest. If people want to get hold of you, how do they find you, please?
Well, the easiest way to get hold of me is probably by telephone, which is my mobile that I've almost always got on me, which is on 07708 760 777, or simply by email l.mannifield@kwuk.com. I'm doing a lot of talking at the moment with agents who are thinking about the transition from a branch high street into setting up on their own, the pitfalls, the money you need, all those kind of things that go alongside it. But I can tell you hand on heart, I drop off and pick my daughter up from school every single day. I've got 3 holidays booked this year. And when I worked in the corporate world, I couldn't afford almost one. So, it really has changed my life for the better. So if anyone's out there thinking about it, just want some advice, and just sort of see if it might be for them, then, get in touch, or anyone that needs some help and advice on selling or renting, really.
Brilliant. Look, thank you. And amazing what you've done in your community as well, and all the things that you set up and that you can continue to do.
Thank you, Stephen. And well done to you too. You've also led quite a very impressive campaign with your school computer and markers campaigns.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So thank you, everybody, for watching today. Really grateful. Please like it, subscribe, share it to everybody as well, because there's loads of fantastic insights, wisdom and gold shared by Liana. So have a good afternoon, evening, morning, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.